I'm ready whenever you say go. All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having us here. Thanks to ExpressVPN. Thanks for the amazing invite to Hong Kong. And I guess that it's also an interesting point in our journey at Tauri. Tauri has been around since 2019. Out of the available languages for interfacing with the system web view, we could have chosen C or Go or Rust. We chose Rust, and I'm glad we did because we came from the JavaScript world where you can try and catch. You never know anything for certain. It might break, it might not. Sometimes you have to throw a console log to break the flow. And learning Rust for us was also a practice in becoming more done. And what I mean by that is this notion of being done. It's what the compiler does for us, right? If it doesn't compile, you broke something. It's not done. And this feeling of little wins that you get every day when your code compiles, when you push it to CI, the tests run, your formatting is fixed, you feel like you accomplished something, you know you accomplished something. Whereas with JavaScript, you have an indication. You make an assumption. You have to write 90% unit tests to verify that assumption. Now, I'm not saying Rust is a panacea or that it's perfect or that JavaScript is bad. Just that I'm here today to talk about a project that's brought me further in my understanding of software. And who am I? First of all, I'm Daniel. I started Tauri with Lucas about 6 years ago now. I'm still serving as the chairperson of the Tauri board of directors because Tauri as a project is managed by a Dutch foundation called the Commons Conservancy. We did this because evil capitalists that I turned into started asking if we wanted to raise some venture capital. And so what we did is we placed the moral stewardship of the open source project inside of the construct of a foundation, which makes a rug pull de facto impossible. So it's always going to be Apache 2. It's always going to be MIT. These are the baseline rules, and we felt like it's important. And yet on the other side, you have a whole bunch of voluntary contributors who become very important to a project as time goes on, and you don't want to lose them. So we did create a company. We raised some venture capital, and now we're still working on straddling that line between doing right by the community and also sustaining the maintenance of the project that people have come to rely on. I'm a habitual volunteer. I've done over 20,000 hours in various different industries, most recently open source, but I've done a lot of community organizing. And I feel like a little shout out to mental health people. Be aware of your limits, grind, but take a break. Yeah. Yes. Breathe. And yeah, I was also at the Quasar framework. I don't know if you know this. It's a Vue.js project. That's where I met Lucas. In case you're watching, Lucas, we're still here. So what is Tauri? From a very high level, it's a GUI app. You use this framework to build your own application. And we've found that it has become a great way to learn Rust because, well, you install the compiler, you install Rust up, you install Cargo, and suddenly you're a Rust engineer because with the one simple command to create Tauri app, suddenly you've bootstrapped the universe, you're eating apple pie, and you feel like you had that first success, right? You finished something, you accomplished something. I don't know if this deck ever mentions the word Electron. I'm not afraid to say it. I think that it's kind of clear the venue where Tauri is acting as a reaction to what Electron became, and in some regards still is. If you don't know Electron, Electron is a Node.js-based version of Tauri. So they ship an entire Node runtime. They ship an entire windowing library. They call it Chromium. It's not exactly Chromium. It takes a lot of work to maintain. They're always behind. And we felt that there had to be a better way to accept trade-offs, but deliver a more security-oriented framework. So we've developed an interface approach that lets the web dev leverage a JavaScript interface that they know to connect across the boundary to Rust core functionality. And you've probably heard of this term tree shaking. That's when you import parts of a library and the rest falls away, so you don't actually bring in those pieces. We're doing that in a very explicit way where you have to opt into functionality. And I think that's one of the largest differentiators between Tauri and Electron, Tauri and capacitor. Instead of shipping a general purpose computing machine, you're shipping the exact pieces you need. And that's why the binaries are 2.5 megabytes. We're not shipping a general purpose runtime. We're leveraging the system web view. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And I think the smallest app anyone's built is 500 kilobytes, and most of that was the ICNS on Mac. Right? So you can go very small. You can gulf it down. These days, like I said, people they start off around 8 megabytes, and if you do some compile time modifications to how you're actually building the ultimate binary, well, then you can get a little bit smaller. This is my slide if I notice that there's Electron fans in the room, because I think that what Electron did, Atom Shell before it, and projects also like Capacitor and Ionic and Cordova, what they've done is made it really easy for vibe coders to create apps. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I just mean that it suddenly became very easy to have entry-level technology available to a broad public, which I think in the educational venue has been very good. It's led to a lot of, waste. Who here uses VS Code or something like VS Code? Cursor, VS Code, something like that. How often does it update? Every other day? How big is the update? 500, 600? How many people in the world use it? We're talking petabytes of traffic. Why are they still shipping Chromium every single time? I can tell you why. It's because Chromium has end days. It has like Chromium updates because vulnerabilities have been detected, and that means they have to ship a whole new version of it. Unfortunately, people don't, right? Like as soon as your Electron or Capacitor app have shipped, they're out of date and they're insecure. And this is the learning and the approach that we took. There's about 15,000 people in our communities. We have a working group, a foundation. Our company provides corporate services and a lot of upstream people. What are the actual pieces? So, Rust, obviously. We use a fork of Winit called Tau, and that is the windowing keyboard accelerators. Rye is the WebView rendering library that interfaces with the respective system WebView on the individual platform. Muda is the way that we interact with menuing, and this is maybe a nice picture if you can see it. I don't know, it might be a little bit too small for you back there, but basically this sort of talks about the way in which the app is interfaced with by the user. So basically we start up here at the top. This is the system binary that then creates all of the ways in which the low-level systems are interacting, so screen, mouse, microphone. And then the runtime itself creates a web view, has a handle to the web view, and this is all then managed by the operating system. And this is actually kind of interesting, I think, for those of you that are developing systems like this. What we discovered when we got to mobile is that our understanding of system architecture wasn't totally great because we had to re-architect things. And this actually led us to more systemic wins, because now that we're taking the approach of looking at it from a desktop paradigm and a mobile paradigm and these other languages, like suddenly we have to deal with Kotlin and Swift, it made us realize that, okay, well, Rust is also good, but it's not the whole story. It's actually a great harness, but what about people who are working with Elixir? What about people who are working with Go or PHP? And I think that this experience of transforming a desktop framework to a mobile also framework has led us to this kind of understanding and perception that there's a lot of different ways to solve problems in engineering, and being hardcore, it has to be Rust or get out, is kind of outdated already. I love Rust, don't get me wrong, but it's not always the right thing. Hello, Android. Maybe someday. I mentioned security. I think it's also important to say it over and over again. We have external third-party audits horizontally and vertically for every major point release. We have an internal team that audits minor releases, and we enforce a type of IP, inter-process communication, or intra, that you as a developer have to configure at runtime in order to empower the application to do the things that you want it to do, which kind of makes sense if you're not using general purpose computing. It's just basically, in other words, use just what you need. And I think one other feature is that we have an additional code signing key so that the application itself knows that the update that is inbound is authentic. Kind of important. And we can build for Mac, Windows, Linux, iOS, Android. Vision is in evaluation, as is Xbox. And I heard something about ESPs and micros, and it gets to the point where you're like, well, wait a second. Why would you even build on something headless, right? Tauri is a GUI application. And I think that what we're seeing is that, especially with the advent of TUIs, you no longer know for a fact exactly where the software is going to ultimately run. And we're also dealing with syncing databases and this multiplayer system that means that the thing has to understand itself. So I think that that's maybe going to be a next venue, is these not just multiplayer, but multi-platform architectures. We all know that that's a thing, but I think treating that from a framework perspective is a great thing. We've got 90,000 stars, which is still baffling to me. I finally discovered there is a cool website, tauri.org.cn. It's an unofficial Chinese clone of the official Tauri website with ads. No, but it's cool. I mean, like it follows the license to a T. You know, that's what community is about, and it broadens our impact in the Chinese language speaking community. So I'm super happy for it. It's very healthy. We've got about 1.5 million lines of active code across a couple dozen repositories, but it's a massive project that handles lots of different things. It's not alone out there. I can skip that. You all know about this. Okay, I guess I'll kind of wrap up with where we're headed next. One of the big complaints that people have had is that the embedded web views are sort of like unloved children or stray cats. You know, like the operating system sort of has to have it, but never really did a good job of it. It's never been properly specified. And so right now in review, we actually have the Chromium embedded framework available for all the desktops. It's very hands-on. It's not clean yet, but it will land with the 3.0, hopefully this year. And Chromium embedded framework, it's kind of like Electron all over again. We have one binary. The reason for that is that you have consistent behavior across platforms. The risk is binary bloat, and it's like, oh, let's do Electron all over it. But if you don't want to follow the Chromium line, we have another alternative that we're working on that we received funding for from the European Union called VersoView. Verso is a derivative of Servo. We've been working on research projects for about 2 years now to resurrect Servo. It was successful. We're working together, I say together in air quotes, with FutureWay, who's put a lot of investment into working on Servo. And the idea of VersoView is that we will finally have shared memory between the WebView and the Rust core, which is something I'm particularly excited about. And then we thought, well, okay, if it's good enough for PHP and it's good enough for Elixir, let's make it good enough for JavaScript. So we built a version of Tauri that you can use Dino in the backend. It's called Taurify. It's pretty cool. Why would you do that? Again, I think for accessibility, it's a good way to introduce more people to the concepts of secure coding. And finally, you might have heard about the new regulations in Europe, the Cyber Resilience Act and the Product Liability Directive. They both require that software manufacturers put a declaration of conformity onto the software that they're placing on the European market, including all libraries. And so we're working right now on the full SBOMification in all of its nuance and grit for Tauri, called Tauri CE. And if you're interested in that, it's a much longer discussion, but basically what we're providing with Tauri CE is a way for corporate types that leverage the open source project to buy a license and absolve themselves of a class of liability inside of their products. This is my company, CrabNebula. We exist really at that kind of frontier where open source ends and business starts. And you can join us over there. And thank you. I'm done.
Great. Any questions?
Hi. With Tauri, what do you recommend for testing? What do you recommend for like testing the software that's built in Tauri, like a end user kind of desktop app or something?
I think that it's a mixture of QA, human testing, and every platform is different. So we have WebDriver for Windows and for Linux, and for Mac OS, we're using or internally vetting a process that just uses AppleScript. There's a new company that is just out. They're called Test. You know what? I forgot. Test Drive? Test. I forgot. I'll put it in the show notes. And they're actually working on an AI approach to just watching the screen. So you would get that kind of superficial user interaction. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Ratatouille.
Ratatouille.
Thank you. But the question is, so how do you see like something like a TUI library, let's say, and Tauri coming together in the future? Any ideas about that?
I mean, one of the hardest parts about building and shipping Tauri apps is understanding where in the process you currently are. Like, especially if you're using something like CI remotely, like nobody tails GitHub action logs unless it breaks, which means you're just kind of waiting to see what happens. So listening to those events and giving the developer who's building right there some insight is probably a nice, easy win. Also, if you run the Tauri dev command, you're probably going to start up some web server that's going to be then communicating with the web view, and there's going to also be potentially different kinds of logging that you might want to see. So span, all I got to say is spans. Show me those spans. I want to see the spans. I want to see how long things take.
Yeah, we can experiment with it. Thank you.
No problem.
For some background, he's the lead on a library called Ratatouille, which is a TUI library for Rust. That's why he talked about, what was it? Tauri? Forgot. Ratatouille, sorry. Any other questions? Of course.
Yes and no. It would on Android, but I think almost every smart TV is a little snowflake. So probably smarter to work on a box. like to take a Roku or something, or to go over to Shenzhen and get your own hardware, and then you know exactly what the HAL has to look like. But there's no reason why it wouldn't work. It's Android. I think the one where I wish I could help out, but I can't, is Harmony OS, because there's no access in Europe, and the developer documentation is, at least what I've seen in English, very, very, very minimal. But Harmony would be like the next one on my list. Tracing. You could install a open source project that we built for Tauri apps explicitly that attaches to the instance and then emits all the traces that you want. I mean, you still have to visualize it, and visualizing in CSS at that kind of frame rate is easier, I would imagine, but I'm happy to have Orhun prove me otherwise.